Hi, I'm John Ficarra, and welcome to Ficarra Classic. Today, I'm going to be taking you around the little shop here at Wingnut Manor and showing you some of the projects we're working on for ourselves and for our clients. To start with, I am sitting in a 1957 Jaguar D-Type. Now, these cars won Le Mans in 1955, 56, and 57. And in 57, they took first, second, third, fourth, and sixth place. They're one of the most legendary race cars ever. And they're selling in these days for anywhere between $6 and $22 million. So you're saying, John, how'd you get a D-Type? I didn't. It's a replica. It's not a real one. So for a couple of zeros less, you can have almost the same driving experience. Now, can these do the 180 miles an hour that the originals did? That's what we're working on. This one belongs to Jay Lamb. Now, and he's best known not just for his quick wit and rugged good looks, he's also one of the founders of the 24 Hours of Lemons. So we're getting this car ready for a season of touring for him. And we're going to take you around the car right now and show you a little bit more about it and then show you the rest of the shop. Let's take a closer look at this D-Type replica. It's constructed very similar to what the D-Types were like, in that they used an aluminum body, not fiberglass, handmade aluminum body, just like the original D-Types, with an attached chassis front and rear. Because the D-Types were revolutionary back in the 50s in that they used one of the first aluminum monocoque center sections. Now, what's a monocoque? Monocoque means they used boxed aluminum instead of tube chassis rails going through it for the structure. And they would bolt on this front end and bolt on the suspension on the back. And it made the car lighter and stronger. They did the same thing with this replica. Now the differences are really just in the smaller parts on this car in the suspension. So hanging off of it, the front suspension and the rear suspension are off of more modern Jaguars from the late 60s to early 70s. And the benefit of that is I can go online and buy brake pads and parts for it relatively cheaply to keep this operational. Now at the heart of the car is one of the greatest engines ever made. This is the XK motor from, really, it started in the 40s and lived all the way through the 90s. This was in the XK120, the XK150, the C-Type, the D-Type, the E-Type. It was in almost every Jaguar in different sizes. In the race car, they were 3.8 liters. They went up to 4.2 liters. They could put out over 300 horsepower. Now this car, we weighed it, weighs 2,100 pounds. So 330 horsepower in a 2,100 pound car, and you've got something that's capable of speeds of over 170 miles an hour. Now, this car, when we got it, wasn't going anywhere close to that. It wouldn't go over 100 miles an hour without scaring the hell out of you. So one of the things we're doing to help stabilize it, we're going through the suspension, and we're going through the way the car sits and everything on it so that it can and will handle more like the original car, or even really better. At each corner, we've got coilovers, and at the rear, we've got dual coilovers on the rear. We'll take a closer look at that. But this really is kind of the best way to get into these kind of cars, because if you had a multi-million-dollar car, you'd never, ever drive it, unless you were driving on the lawn at Pebble. But Jay's going to drive this everywhere. He's famous for driving to, like, Safeway and going and getting, you know, some food and shopping in his cars. So this is going to make a huge splash down in Santa Cruz when he takes it out for a spin. But let's go take a closer look at some more pieces. Okay, let's start at the front. We got this really sweet ventilated disc brake. Now, you would never had ventilated disc brakes in the 50s, but this one is off of an XJS. We've got a 4-pot caliper. That's a lot of stopping power for a 2,100 pound car. Then moving along to the engine, we've got a nice, beautiful set of Weber carburetors. Those are going to be a lot of fun to tune up and get going. We'll move into the cockpit area, and we've got the traditional wood steering wheel, which would crack off and go straight through your sternum in a crash at speed, but hey, who cares about that? And we got a beautiful dash set, very, very similar to what the real D-Types look like. And you've got a set of seat belts only bolted in a single bolt at the top. And if you look around the back, it is not the safest crash structure. That is all that's holding that seat belt on. Then on the other side, the D-Types had this panel covering the side of the passenger side of the car, And the reason for that was aerodynamics. Now, it had to be a two-seater to be a sports car, but well, I'll take this one off and I'll introduce you to mechanic Matt. Give the people a wave, Matt.
Hello.
Hello. Matt helps me out here at the garage. He is the most awesome of people. And there is your little passenger seat. So you can stuff yourself in there, and you even get a seat belt. How nice of them. But you can see how that cleans up the body line when that panel's on. Now moving to the back, here's something you're never going to see, and that is an uncovered back end of a D-Type. Now this isn't what a D-Type race car would have looked like. It's fashioned very differently, but we've got a fuel tank up here, a little over 20 gallons, and you can see the famous IRS suspension that Jaguar used in the E-Type and a lot of their cars for decades. And this is also the same kind of rear end you'll see in kit cars for Cobras and 32 hot rods and all kinds of things. But you can see twin shocks on the rear on each side. And again, the famous disc brakes on the inside, which was a Jaguar thing, trying to reduce unsprung weight on the outside. They moved the entire brake system onto the differential. Doesn't make easy for brake swaps, but it would help for unsprung weight. Very cool. And then back to the beautiful, the rear body is just stunning. You see the headrest here, which with a helmet in front of it made it a little bit more aerodynamic. Matt, would you open up the hatch there for me? There we go. And this is where your fuel tank filler would go. And we'll get that going. But we're going to put this on today and get the whole rear end on. But this is all hand-bucked aluminum. It is beautifully made. They did a beautiful job on it. But you can see the raw aluminum on the inside. This is where the little trunk is. And yes, it does carry a spare. And that is your naked D-Type. Okay, so that's probably enough D-Type for now. I will keep you up to date on the progress of the car. We're gonna get the body back on, get it back together and take it for a spin. I'll take you with me and we'll be able to hear the magnificent song of probably one of the greatest straight sixes ever built. So now, you've probably been wondering what the colorful bits are behind me. So let's take a look at some of the other cars here at the garage. This car is our friend Essie's 1970 Porsche 911E. And this car actually had some renown in California as an autocross car. And so it used to have like an RSR front bumper on it and a big whale tail on the back. But Essie wants us to sell it for him. So we kind of made the car more stock. We've gone through it front to rear. And it's almost ready to go up for sale. Now, if you don't know much about the 911E, it's an interesting story. It comes in between the 911T and the 911S in the nomenclature. So back in '69, you could get a low T, the middle E, or the really sporty S. And the E was different from the rest in that it had a kind of leveling hydropneumatic front suspension, which was really interesting. And it wasn't like the Citroën suspensions where you turn the car on and it rises and things like that. There's no pumps or mechanical stuff going on. It actually uses the motion of the car to level itself if you have, a lot of luggage in the front. Most of those systems don't work anymore. Most have been removed from 911Es. This car has a front suspension with a 911S in it. Again, it was an autocross car. We left all the autocross suspension underneath of it, so it still handles amazingly. But the 911E also shared the fuel injection with the 911S, the mechanical fuel injection, which was a very similar system to what you could find in the old 906 Carrera race cars. And this one was tuned with cams more closely to a torque kind of spec, and the S's were more horsepower. So the interesting thing is that the 911E 0 to 60 was actually faster than the S. And the E guys will always tell you that fact over and over again. So we'll get this car sorted and sold and probably maybe do a video on that. But let's move on to the last car in the garage. This is the Bahama Mama. And the Bahama Mama is pretty famous in that it used to be part of the Brumos collection in Florida. And most people know Brumos for their racing team, but they all had an extraordinary private collection for years, which they now have in their new museum. And I have a friend of mine, Kelly Telfer. He's a world-renowned artist and painter, and one of the most persuasive people I've ever met. He went and saw the Brumos collection when it was still private a few years ago, and he persuaded them. And I mean, he beat them down or something. I don't know what he said, but he got them to sell him the Bahama Mama out of their collection. Now, the Mama is special, and they took the Mama in years ago. This guy came in with the Mama, only 50,000 miles on it, in the late 80s, and he wanted to put a whale tail on it and wider fenders and big tires on it. And Bob Snodgrass, who was the general manager at the time, was smart enough to go, this is a beautiful example of a 68 911. I'm not letting you do that. You can go buy a 930 and we will take this in as a trade. And he took it in as a trade and went right into the collection. So Kelly now is the fortunate owner of it. And what we're doing is we're helping Kelly make sure that it's correct so he can go show it. So we're going through the car front to back, correcting things that might be wrong or incorrect for the period, and making it a real nice driving show car. And the last project we have to do to a major project is we are having the transmission rebuilt, and Jerry Woods is doing that for us. Jerry is one of the most famous 911 mechanics of all time. He was a mechanic at Le Mans, and if we're fortunate, I'll get him to tell us some stories, because he has some of the best car stories you'll ever hear. You know what? This is a short wheelbase. The other 911 is a long wheelbase. Since we've got both of these cars here, it might be kind of fun to show you what the difference is, because people hear those phrases all the time, the long wheelbase, short wheelbase, but what does that really mean? So maybe we'll do that in a second, but I want to thank Kelly for letting us bring this beautiful car to our shop, and we're taking care of it, Kelly. It's going to be fine. We're taking care of the Mama. All right, since we're fortunate enough to have a long wheelbase and short wheelbase 911 in the shop, I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to see the difference between the two. So on the short wheelbase car here, 1968 911, you can see in here, there's the torsion bar. Now, Porsches didn't use springs, traditional coil springs like on most cars. This is the spring for the car. It goes through the car. And in order to access that torsion spring, you have to have a little plate on the outside. So that plate comes off and you can do the torsion bar. But if you look on this, there's only a little sliver of body between the end of this plate and the end of the fender, right? So that's the short wheelbase. On the long wheelbase, same thing, same torsion bar suspension, same plate you need to get to it, but you'll see that it almost has like 2.5, 3 inches of distance between the end of the fender and that plate. And that's it. It's pretty simple. They made the longer wheelbases so that the cars would be more stable at speed. There was also the notorious thing about how a 911 was really twitchy with its rear engine. And the early 911 short wheelbases are, but if you know how to drive a short wheelbase, they are a ton of fun. But the long wheelbase cars were definitely more stable. So there you have it. Go impress your friends at parties, and you can point out short wheelbase or long wheelbase. So that's it for our first visit to the garage. I hope you enjoyed yourself. So the plan is to do more videos on each of the cars as they progress through the garage and as the new cars come in, and to show you some of the work and some of the history of the vehicles and have some fun. So if you've gotten this far, I certainly hope you like and subscribe, and we'll see you soon here on Ficarra Classic.